Well, it's good to have you with us this evening as we go into the second lesson in this series of the science of the flood of Genesis. And hopefully the first lesson that we looked at was beneficial. I will tell you up front, this material tonight is probably about as far out of my comfort zone as you can get. Not that it isn't science and technically based, but it's stuff that I've not been around much. I've not spent a lot of time dealing with nautical dimensions and construction, and we're going to get into some of that tonight, and I hope that I hope I can get it across in at least a semi-understandable fashion. Of course, as we consider the fact that as Brother Luke read, that God commanded Noah to build an ark because the destruction of mankind was coming, and Noah obeyed. And that, of course, is always very important, that Noah, and we as Noah did, obey God and what he says. Of course, skeptics have always questioned the account of the Genesis flood, and they're always going to question it. So we just need to be able to say there are ways, and that's what we're looking at tonight, because the Bible is limits of what it tells us about the ark. It describes a few things, and we're going to run very quickly through that. But we want to look at some of the research that's been done that shows us that not only is this possible from the standpoint of God as the supernatural creator who could miraculously save everybody he wanted, the inhabitants of the ark and the animals on the ark. God has that ability, but there is also practical applications that we can look at from the world around us today to know that it could have happened. So the worldwide destruction came about when God saw the evil of mankind, and of course, he planned for the salvation of mankind because Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And so we're here today because of Noah and the grace that the fact that he was obedient and that he obeyed God's command. And so we can certainly be thankful to Noah for that. But in what we can see, and I want to say this, as I said in the first lesson a month ago, and I'll say in the last lesson, is anything too hard for God? The answer is no. God miraculously could have done, he could have built a bubble, a dome around the animals and Noah and flooded everything else if he chose to do that. But he did it in a method that still has application today. And so that's what we're going to look at. Thursday night at the gospel meeting, I was talking to some of the folks from River, and I believe I said, we probably ought to call this lesson, Would It Float? And that's the question on the ark. Would it float? As God gave Noah the commandments, and of course, again, could God make it float? If he said, make it out of stone and put big holes through it, could God have made that thing float? I'll guarantee he could have. And so is anything too hard for God? No. And so I do not want to take the miraculous out of any part of the story of Noah and the flood and the science that we can gather from that. But again, the reason it's important from the Live Science website, the one thing that we know for sure from geology is that a global flood never happened, said David Montgomery, a professor of geomorphology at the University of Washington. So we know that the skeptics are out there. This, everything from, Noah could not have gathered up animals from all over the world. Well, the ark wouldn't have been big enough to have all the animals in the world, and on and on and on and on it goes, because people are going to do everything they can to discount the truths revealed in God's Word. And we need to be ready for that. We need to understand that that's the case. We know that Noah had faith, and one of the things that I don't think that we necessarily take, we don't take into account that obviously from Adam and Eve to Noah, there was a great deal of technological knowledge. There was a great deal of things that they understood. And I want to read Genesis chapter 4, verses 20 to 22, because I think it points out something that, again, we don't always take for granted, or we take it for granted, or we just don't think about. When it says in chapter 4, verses 20 to 22, and Adad had Jebel, and he was the father of such as dwelt in tents and such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such things that handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was named. And so the people of Noah's time had farming skills, they had tent making skills, they had musicians, they had workers of brass and iron. And so they had technology that, we don't really think of. As we look at the construction of the ark, they had abilities that we didn't always think about. And in verse 4 of chapter 6, it says that they were mighty men of renown. They had made a name for themselves. And of course, you have to understand, and Jesus said in Matthew 24:38, that at the time of the flood, that God brought the flood upon mankind, they thought everything was normal, and of course referring back to the second coming of Christ, that things are going to be going on just like they always have. They were marrying and giving in marriage. Mankind must have thought he had it made. They thought they were they've got it. We're good, okay? And so at the time, and of course we know the evil that had permeated mankind to the point that the very intent and every thought of their mind was evil continually. And so, as Brother Luke read, Noah was commanded to build an ark out of gopher wood, to make rooms in the ark and to pitch it within and without with pitch. Well, gopher wood, of course, we're kind of clueless on that. The Bible Encyclopedia, or the Encyclopedia of the Bible, from the Bible Gateway website, says this: wood of pitch could be a resinous wood, such as conifers. Cypresses are another possibility, since they were often selected in ancient times for shipbuilding purposes. So we don't know what gopher wood was. It obviously was known to Noah and to the people at the time, and it must have been available in great abundance, because the ship that Noah was to build was not a small vessel. It was going to be, actually the largest vessel built for several hundred, if not close to 1,000 years before we saw ships get anywhere near the size of the ark. And of course, it was to be pitched within and without. Most commentators absolutely believe that from the area that Noah would have lived in, the Mesopotamia area, that there are naturally occurring bitumen pits that bubble up oil. Of course, we know the region is very abundant. There's a great abundance of petroleum products, oil. But this pit seems to be material, and it does, just as in the pictures you can see here. It bubbles up out of the ground. There are places where you can go and stick a stick in and come up with this real thick, tarry stuff, and that was probably the pitch that Noah used. And bitumen is still used today. Many of our roads are what we call tar and chip. You put the gravel down, then they put this tar across it and then holds it together. We've got some of it right out front there going down the hill where we've sealed the parking lot, and I've taken whatever was left in a bucket and poured it out into the gravels, and it's holding the rocks together quite well. So the pitch, obviously, again, was a waterproofing technique, as it is still today. Out at our family farm, my wife's uncle used creosote and soaked fence posts and rails in creosote, and they're going to live. They're going to be in that. They'll be standing in the ground for 100 years. I can almost guarantee it. They're not going to rot like the fence that was built about 40 years ago. That I'm constantly replacing posts, replacing rails because they're rotting up. And so this pitch, obviously, and again, God told Noah this is what you're to do. You're to use this. So obviously there were lessons that mankind could learn about shipbuilding techniques from what God commanded Noah to do. Well, again, we know that God commanded Noah to build the vessel of a certain length. And this was new to me. I had not seen this before as I was researching this lesson. There are, and you can see there are 2 cubit sticks. And these have been found in Mesopotamia, in that area, that were used to mark off and measure, just like rulers. And so, of course, we know that cubits varied in length. The Hebrew short cubit was 17.5 inches. The Egyptian 17.6. The Hebrew long was about 20.4, and the Egyptian 20.6. So that causes the problem that we have when we say, well, how big was the ark? Because we don't know what cubit was being used. We don't know what standard was being applied to the 300 cubits. Of course, this is from the Ark Encounter. If out in Kentucky, if you ever have the opportunity to go see that structure, it just sort of brings to life the colossal nature of the task that Noah was given. And of course, the task that he accomplished successfully, because we're here to tell the story. We're here to read the story. And so the 300 cubits would have been anywhere between 475 and 510 feet long. I have read that there are longer cubits than 20.6 inches, and some people have put the length of the ark at possibly up to close to 600 feet. Most commentators put it at about the 510 feet, assuming that Noah was probably using the Hebrew cubit of 20.5 inches, 50 cubits wide, 75 to 85 feet wide, and of course 30 cubits 45 to 65 feet high. So it was a large vessel, obviously. By comparison, you can see this is a modern day Virginia-class submarine, which are anywhere from 450 to 650 feet long, depending on the model. There's the ark and a football field. Of course, that's a 747. So you kind of get an idea how big this structure was. At youth camp many years ago, when I would do some of these lessons, we would take kids out to one of the sports fields, and we put a stake on one end, then we would start walking, and we would walk the 500 feet and say, you just walk from one end of the ark to the other. And their eyes get about that big, because whenever you're looking, way back at the other end of that field, it is huge. Of course, the volume then inside of a vessel that large, 1,396,000 cubic feet. Is that enough space for the animals that God expected Noah to put onto the ark? Well, you could fit 522 standard railroad boxcars in the ark and have plenty of space. And so there, without a doubt, there was plenty of room for the animals on the ark. Now I want to read the passage in Genesis from verses 17 through 22 in chapter 6, because it sort of lays out this arrangement of what animals needed to be there. So from chapter 6, verses 17 through 22, the account says this: And behold, even I, do bring a flood upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, who from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee I will establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing, of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing on the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come in unto thee, to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee all the food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and them. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. And so we can see that God had a very specific plan on what animals needed to be in the ark, what needed to be saved. And of course, as the King James says, in whose nostrils was the breath of life, or in whose was the breath of life. And so when we look at the idea, again, we just very quickly want to go through this. The animals that needed to be on the ark: mammals, of course, dogs, cats, horses, etc., birds, reptiles, amphibians. About 21,000 species that had nostrils, that have needed to breathe air as land animals do. Those animals had to be on the ark, because they certainly wouldn't have been able to swim for more than a year as the entire ocean or the entire world was covered by water up to 15 cubits to the highest mountain. Now, again, here's one of the biggest disagreements, or one of the biggest points of skeptics, that Noah couldn't have, an ark could not hold all of the animals in the world. Well, we see there are 21,000 species of animals, that mostly mammals, or mostly vertebrates, excuse me, that's the word I was after, mostly vertebrates, animals with backbones that breathe that way. There were lots of animals that do not fit that qualification. They did not need to be in the ark. Fishes, Selenocerata, Chinodermata, the arthropods, which includes the insects. Even if Noah had to have all the insects would fit in one normal-sized bedroom. All the insects in the world. How much space does 2 fleas take up? I mean, come on, let's be real. And they could have been behind the ear of one of the rabbits and done just fine. Okay, so and there's more than 800,000 arthropods. And there's expected, or there is predicted to be more than 1 million species of insects. Again, many of the insects that you swat and see today have never been identified. No one has identified that particular species of insect. So, so there was a large number, 680 animals that had no need to be on the ark, because they would do just fine in the water. All of the fishes, jellyfishes, starfish, the clams and oysters and things like that, and worms. So when we hear skeptics say, well, the story of the flood can't be true because Noah couldn't have all the animals in the world wouldn't fit on the ark. Stop them right there and say, no, they didn't have to be. All the animals did not have to be on the ark. Just those that had nostrils. And if we stop them right there, we go from 21,000, to, we take 1 million different species of animals out of the ark, down to 21,000. And so we need to, again, stand up for the truth of God's word. We shouldn't be ignorant of how many animals God wanted Noah to have on the ark. But let's move on. The question that we really want to get into this evening is the seaworthiness of the ark. Is it possible for Noah to construct? Again, God could have miraculously taken care of this. Okay? And let's say that up front. But what God described to Noah, would it do the job if we were able to construct an ark? And there is a floating ark today. In the country of Sweden, a private businessman built an ark, and it floats on a body of water, and it is the size of Noah's ark. And so the one in Kentucky, of course, is setting on dry land and is only half an ark and is supported on concrete and steel. But there is an ark that actually is built and does float. The 17th century, a study was done that showed the 7-to-1, which is approximately the ratio of length to height, or length to width, of the ark, depending on the cubit that you take, but about 7-to-1, 6.5-to-1, rounding it up to 7. That the length to the width of the ark would allow it to be one of the most stable dimensions to prevent its capsizing, to prevent it from rolling over. Of course, we know the ark only did one thing. That was float. That was its only job. Noah didn't have to steer it. Noah didn't have to drive it. He didn't have to put a motor in it. It was just going to float. Noah, the animals went in. Noah and his family went in. God closed the door, and the flood came. 1993, there was a study done that showed the ark, as described in the book of Genesis, would withstand waves up to 100 feet high. Now that's a pretty tall wave. Most what they call rogue waves today in the field of oceanography, the most 65, 70 feet. But even if the flood of Noah, and of course, remember, could God have stilled the water around where the ark was? Could the rest of the world just be in all kinds of turmoil and the ocean just, and the waters where, I started to have wives sing, Master, the tempest is raging. Okay? Because what did Jesus do on the Sea of Galilee? Horrible storm. And the disciples, Master, Jesus was asleep. Master, aren't you worried about dying? We're going to die out here. And of course, Jesus said, peace be still. And so God could have done that. But even if he didn't, the studies do show that the ark would have been able to withstand up to 100-foot waves. This is, I think this was 1991. 4 physicists from a university in England they had a project they had to do. And so their project of a course they were taking that encouraged students to apply basic physics principles to more general questions, the team did the math on whether the ark would float and found that an ark full of animals in those dimensions theoretically would float. All right? One of the men, Thomas Norris, one of the students, said, you don't think of the Bible necessarily as a scientifically accurate source of information, so I guess we were quite surprised when we discovered it would work. And so, of course it would work. Now, it works with the dimensions and did not need the miraculous power of God, when Noah constructed the ark the way God told him to. And so we can certainly see that even recent studies have proven that this is possible. In 1977, a naval architect, David Colling, found that even wind speeds of 210 knots, which is about 3 times hurricane force winds, the ark would have been more than stable enough for the inhabitants to be able to survive. He examined 4 different principles, and here's where it starts to get, way over my head. Okay, I'm getting in deep now. But he outlined 4 principles that in naval architecture are used to determine the stability of seagoing ships. The angle of steady heel under the influence of forces acting to overturn the ship, the range of positive stability, the residual dynamic stability, and the relative magnitudes of the maximum moment to right the ship and the moment to overturn the ship. Of course, what little I do know, if you're out on a body of water and something, and you can go so far, and then whatever you're on, the inner tube or whatever will do what? It'll come back up to a right position. Once you reach that moment of overturn, you get to the point and it does what? There's no stopping it, is there, Mike? It's going over and you're going over with it. And that's why, of course, water safety says that you should always have what? Always have a life vest on. Always make sure that you're safe. And so, again, these factors, and I'll tell you, these 4 points were about 20 pages. All right. I just took the time because the author went on to explain each one of those, how the range of positive stability in the dimensions of the ark would allow it to do its job, which was to float and to protect the people, the animals, the living things inside of it perfectly well. This one I found interesting. If you look at this triangular shape using the ark's dimensions of 7 to 1, 300 by 50, 300 cubits by 50 cubits wide. If you had this triangle, which represents up here the maximum comfort. In other words, being inside this vessel would give you a nice smooth ride. Well, being over here in this corner, you would have the maximum strength in a vessel this size. All right, and then on this corner you would have the maximum stability. As far as, again, the wider a ship is, the more likely it is to be stable. It would be harder to overturn. And yet the ark the dimensions would put it somewhere right about dead center of all three of these: comfort, strength, and stability. Now imagine that God would know what the exact best dimensions were. I was going to spend some time on this. I don't think I have time. But, whenever you're looking at a vessel that's, especially some of the large seagoing vessels that we have nowadays, the amount of the vessel below the waterline, what's called the draft, is important because if your ship gets too high, which amazes me about some of the new ocean-going vessels like the one that ran into the bridge in Baltimore that have all these containers on them, looks to me like when they stack those things up so high, what would happen? It would get top-heavy. Well, we know it's going to sink, but it looks like it would get top-heavy. And yet, of course, they've worked out the width and all that. Like I said, there's a whole lot to that, and time is not going to permit, so I'm going to hustle through that. Now, the Ark Encounter out in Kentucky has done this, and this is interesting, but there's not an ounce of Bible to back it up. It does fit very well with naval architectural design. A stern sail, and again I put a question mark after that because if you remember the earlier picture of the Ark Encounter, they show a stern sail, which basically is this structure here on the back of the ship that sort of would orient. As wind would blow, it would orient, that's the word I'm after, orient the ship into the wind so that it was, the wind and the waves would have been coming straight on. This would help a large floating vessel as winds increase, to have a greater stability. Well, a bow projection. Now we do see this in modern ships. If you look at these modern ocean-going vessels, they have a large bow projection on them. And that increases the stability to waves. That's below the waterline in the draft, below the waterline, and that helps to provide stability against waves crashing against. And again, if you're pointing into the waves, like I said, all the storm movies that I've ever seen in ships, they always want to face, whenever the wave's coming at them, they want to be what? Going into it. They don't want to be caught sideways, because if they get caught sideways, they're more likely to be capsized. And so these structures, could Noah have built these on the ark? God didn't say. We don't have that. It's pure speculation. But it certainly, if they were, it would increase the stability of the ark. Well, these three principles, the draft, distance, buoyancy, Archimedes principles, and the weight of the vessel and the cargo. Do you ever think about the fact that God knew exactly how much that ark was going to weigh? To the ounce. He knew exactly how much wood, possibly how much metal. There may have been metal brackets and things, because we know they worked in iron and brass. Did he know the weight of the animals? He knew the exact ounce, to the ounce, of every animal that had to be on that ark. And of course, he had the ability. Now imagine that, the God of the creation, God who created everything, would know how to build a perfect vessel to protect the occupants of the ark. Is that too hard of a thing to imagine? Well, not for me, it's not. When he can count the number on every person's head on the entire earth, he knows, I comb my hair and a few fall out. Did God know that they fell out? He knew that exact number. He knows that exact number. And so for us to imagine that it would not be possible for God to give Noah the perfect design that would keep him and the animals that were in the ark healthy and safe. This is a picture from inside of the Ark Encounter. Did the shipbuilding technology exist in the days of Noah that would allow this? Well, again, you can see that they used large, literally trees that they brought in, and then used laminated beams that had been glued together to give them the curved shape and things like that. But they also used, attachment points. Now, that you say, well, they didn't have, but they did have iron and brass, so they may have had those kind of connectors. This is from the 7th century BC. This is technology that they now have. They've uncovered. They've discovered ships that the Greeks built that were up to 120 feet long, using a mortise and tenon method of construction. They would take the sides, the wood on the sides, they would mortise out holes, and then they would have a tenon that they would put down in, bring the next one down, and then use a dowel to anchor the pieces together. This is technology that the Greeks had in the 7th century. Now, did Noah use something like this? The technology obviously is there. And this is a little, this is a different breakdown. But you can see how those tenons would lock the two sides, the two sets of planks together, so that there would not be any, movement. Again, and then you pitch that within and without with pitch, to waterproof it from the inside and out. Would that technology have allowed? The Vikings, developed and built ocean-going vessels about 75 feet long is the largest we found to date. Of wood construction, they too had iron connectors and things like that. But, ocean-going vessels, of course, that, in their case, they would power them, they would row the things. But, so we see that the technology, was and has been present for many years. Again, if God had said, Noah, take some Lincoln logs, I'll date myself. Everybody my age remembers what Lincoln logs were. They were little sections of wood that had little notches in them, and you'd stack them up and build things. If God had said, Noah, take a bunch of Lincoln logs and lay them down end to end and make it this long, and I'm going to hold it together, would it have held together? Absolutely. You can't take the miraculous out of the ark, but you can't say that that's what, that was the only thing that was responsible. Noah had 120 years to build the ark while he was preaching to mankind to repent, but we know that there is a lot of evidence. Well, I find this one interesting as I dug through the research. In chapter 7, verse 13, it talks about after the flood, Noah uncovered the ark. Now, and of course it had one window, it said, and, so does that mean one little window? Or, at my house we've got a bow window or a bay window. It's one window, but what's it got in it? Individual sections. I think there are 4 or 6 or something. Okay, is it possible that the one window was like that and just had little slats that separated and went all the way around the ark to provide light? We don't know, okay, because it just says one window. But we know that Noah was able to uncover the ark after the rain stopped in verse 13 of chapter 7. And this particular diagram shows how it may have, the roof may have pivoted, as it fit together and was held in place. During the downpour of the flood would have shed water, and of course, then whenever the windows of heaven were stopped, it stopped raining after 40 days and 40 nights, then Noah uncovered the ark. So we really, just aren't sure. And again, from the passage I read, we know that Noah was told to gather up all the food that they would need. All right? Many skeptics say, well, now, how could Noah have gotten the food for a koala bear and a kangaroo and an opossum, and start listing every animal and say, how could Noah have done that? Of course, and we've addressed this before, 21,000 types of animals, species of animals that breed there. They had to be on the ark for over a year. Animals get hungry unless, and you can talk to Martin or White or Lydia about the black bear. know that black bears go into hibernation, October, November, depends on the food supply. And they'll stay in hibernation for May, April, depends on the weather, 4 and 5 months. How much do they eat during that time? 0. Okay? They don't even poop. They don't even defecate, right? All right? So during that time, their bodies have went into an absolute state of suspended animation. It's called hibernating, or and this is animals all over the world do this, not just black bears. Squirrels can do it. Now they'll hibernate for just periods of a week or two, and then they'll come out and look around, check things out. If they can't find any food, they'll go back into hibernation. Estivation is the condition that animals go into a long period of dormancy in a hot tropical climate instead of a cold food poor climate. Or torpor, which basically means they're just there. They just sort of zone out and reduce their food intake, reduce their bodily needs, and so on. And so we know that it's certainly possible for God to make all of these animals come into the ark, go to their assigned rooms or wherever, and lay down and sleep for the next year. Certainly not beyond, but even at that. Can we not say that what did Jesus do with 5 loaves and 2 fishes in Matthew 14? He fed more than 5,000 men, plus women and children, and ended up with not 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but what? 12 baskets. And so again, can we take the miraculous out of the ark, out of the story of the ark? Absolutely not. But from what we can see of the instructions that God gave to Noah, the method by which he was told to build the ark, the dimensions of the ark is still being used by naval architects today to design ships, our ocean-going ships that sail the oceans, of course, carrying so much of our modern goods around the world. Well, what happened to the ark? Where'd the ark go? There's a huge interest in finding the ark. Of course, we know that Scripture says that at the end of the flood, after the year of the flood, that they rested on the mountains of Ararat. Mountains of Ararat, not Mount Ararat, but the mountains of Ararat. That's like saying the Rocky Mountains. Okay? This whole area, starting down in from here all the way up, have been termed, the mountains of Ararat. The location of possibly what some have believed is the remains of the ark is located clear down here. Here is what would have been ancient Babylon, all right, and modern day Iraq is in this area. And so this is the location of this particular structure. Now, is this the ark of Noah? Well, Iraq does not allow a lot of archaeological excavation. There have been a few trips to this location. They're not allowed to dig. They've done some side scan radar and things like that. And they say that they're finding that there are voids below these, below the ground level. Again, I don't believe that God intends for the ark to be found, because what would man do with it if we found it? Or the cross that Jesus died on, what would we do with it? We'd be selling pieces of it. We'd be worshiping it. It would be a religious shrine. And of course, God had Noah build the ark. The ark saved Noah and his family, our ancestors, and all of the animals that we see on the earth today. Well, the ark was a plan to save mankind. God has had a plan to save mankind and has a plan today for the saving of mankind. His Son, Jesus, came to the earth to live and die, to teach us what that plan was. And by following that plan, of course, we can have salvation just like Noah. If Noah had not pitched the ark, on the outside? Well, I think, or on the inside. Well, the outside's important. I know that the outside's important. Got to make that outside waterproof. But I won't bother to do the inside. That's just too much work. What would the ark have done when the floods came and the waters rose? It would have sat right there. It would have never left the starting gate. And so, just like Noah had to follow the plans of the ark exactly, today, to be part of the plan of salvation that God has planned to save mankind today, we have to follow His plan. We can't change it. We can't alter it. We can't make modifications because, well, we think this is a better way to do it. All right? We're told that we need to repent and be baptized. Of course, Peter on the day of Pentecost in the early church in Jerusalem, they were added to the church daily. This evening, if you need to take part in the plan of salvation that God has put together for saving mankind, not physically, but eternally and spiritually. We want to offer that invitation. Just like Noah did what God commanded, so we must do what God commands in order for us to be pleasing to Him. This evening, if you've done that, if you've obeyed the gospel and you've been baptized and added to the Lord's church, you're in that ark of safety, quote unquote, as it were. The church is where the saved will be found eternally. Only those that are inside the ark of Noah were saved, and only those inside the church will be saved. If you've done that and you've been drawn back into the world, maybe by the problems that the skeptics that are convincing, I'll tell you, they can be convincing about the flood of Noah and say, well, maybe that really didn't happen the way they said it did. Maybe it was just a local flood, or maybe it was just a little ship, or they've got all kinds of things. But if that maybe has caused you to doubt the account, or you need to be added to the Lord's church to be in that saved condition, we'd encourage you to come while we stand and sing the song select.